Hey everybody, welcome to Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. On this episode, a deep dive into one of the foundational cuisines of the American South, Gullah Geechee cooking. If you've ever been to Charleston, you've almost certainly enjoyed it. And that's where Chef BJ Dennis is from. Chef Dennis, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
I could not be better. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with an overarching question. Define Gullah Geechee, please.
Gullah Geechee is the culture of African Americans here in the low country of South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, and northern Florida. The region, by definition, starts in Wilmington, North Carolina, right outside Wilmington, down to Jacksonville, but it really spreads a little more inland, South Carolina, up to the Orangeburg area, even all the way down to Florida, even to Oklahoma and Mexico, truthfully. But the culture is a pure American culture. It is a culture that was developed mainly on the plantations. The enslaved here were able to hold on to a lot of their culture roots, languages, and Gullah in its purest form is many different dialects from different tribal groups in Africa mixed in with a little bit of English. And you also have a little bit of indigenous language also, but it's mainly Africanisms in the words. People kind of mix Gullah Geechee. We say Gullah in its purest form is the language. Geechee is the English derivative of the Gullah language, which is what people like to quote unquote say Ebonics or slang, which is truthfully, it's a real language. But that is the culture here in the low country. It's people don't know South Carolina was heavy in the rice industry of Africans through the Senegambia region. But you also had indigo, cotton, and those other crops also. But yes, that is kind of a short version of a long story.
When did enslaved people begin to arrive in Charleston?
Well, they were in South Carolina, truthfully, 15. There was right outside of Charleston, one of the first enslaved revolts in North America. The first documented in North America was here in Georgetown, South Carolina. So people have been kind of intermingling free and enslaved and hiding out since before the 1600s. So I would say middle 1500s. But the culture probably really evolved. You want to talk about the 1700s when you started to get this influx of enslaved people from the Senegambia region, Sierra Leone, mainly the Rice Coast part of West Africa, and the Congo also. A big amount of folks came from the Congo. So you had that West and Central African mashup.
And what got you so interested in preserving and explaining this culture?
Well, truthfully, as a chef and being from Charleston, I lived in the Virgin Islands for 4 years. From 2004 to 2008, I lived in St. Thomas. That is where I saw unapologetic culture, like Afro-Caribbean culture. You saw like murals of resistance leaders and political figures. And, I grew up in Charleston. That was one of the places that was the heart of the Confederacy. So I grew up, with Confederate monuments and streets named after Confederate heroes and signers of our Declaration of Independence who were also staunch pro-slavery people like John C. Calhoun. So I grew up around seeing that. So when I moved to St. Thomas, I would see, like pictures of even Martin Luther King and Haitian Revolution leaders. So you saw a different perspective, and I started to really dig more into my history. You grew up knowing your history, but sometimes going away shows you a lot more. You learn more. You see from the outside looking in. And I came back in 2008, and truthfully, I was always into my culture, but what really got me into it was probably coming back home and seeing how Charleston had evolved into this super mega culinary city. And to me, it was like, well, here y'all talking about Charleston in the culinary lens, but you are forgetting probably the biggest player in that, which was the Gullah Geechee culture. The foodways of the Low Country is well known. Charleston was well known before it became this darling city nationwide. It was known for years as a foodie city. We have a distinct foodways and Low Country cuisine. Well, the queen mother of Low Country cuisine is Gullah Geechee food. So I just started doing pop-ups around, I think it was around, I want to say 2012, started doing pop-ups. Just wanted to represent the foodways like how I knew it. We have great mom and pop restaurants in the city, but I felt like nobody was really doing it all the way like how we were raised up with the fresh vegetables, and everything wasn't fried all the time, and the seafood. And I wanted to represent and show the Low Country foodways. And so I just started around that time. And with that became this whole platform that I'm sitting on today, which I never imagined. Truthfully, I just wanted to represent in the city.
Did you further your cooking knowledge in St. Thomas significantly?
Living in St. Thomas, for the most part, for me was more about growth as a young man. That was my first time ever leaving Charleston. Obviously, I was working in kitchens in Charleston, but I also, I was still living with my parents. I think I was 23 at that time, 23, maybe going on 24. So I found my way there. Culinary wise, I learned a lot from, let's just say I love St. Thomas, but it was very touristy. But the best food was the locals. And what I did learn was being unapologetic about your food ways. I mean, I did work with a couple of really great chefs who did a little, for what it was worth, kind of more high end, like showing their local food and kind of more fancy plating and a little more refinement in it. And I did get that from a couple of chefs, particularly a chef named Dougie, who I consider him one of the inspirations for me. But St. Thomas, more than anything else, was more about growth as a man and also growth as somebody who understanding his history and his culture and his roots. That was really the big thing for me.
Did you also spend time in West Africa?
I've traveled through West Africa. I was in Cameroon last year. I've been to West Africa. I've been, since about 2018, I've been traveling to West Africa. 2017, COVID stopped those 2 years. But yeah, I was in Cameroon this past February, actually. Been to Benin, Togo, Angola, Senegal.
And how did those trips inform your cooking?
Oh, man. Truthfully, it's like you regaining something that was taken from you, but also seeing the similarities. The symbolisms were crazy. Like, we eat red rice in Charleston. Red rice is synonymous in Charleston. I don't care what ethnic background you are, but red rice is basically the daughter of chabujin or jollof rice. So I saw these similarities, the different type of rice dishes that we eat, like seafood rice. And I'm in Senegal and I'm seeing the seafood rice over there. And I'm like, whoa, this is where this stuff comes from, because a lot of people have not really studied the history of rice in Western Africa. I mean, the two oldest rice regions in the world is West Africa and China. But people have never really studied West African, the culture of rice in West Africa. So you got a lot of historians, and I read stuff that claim that the pearl rices that we eat in the Low Country came from the British. But me going to West Africa, seeing like, wait a minute, first of all, we were brought here because of our rice knowledge. We were the ones who were cooking. The Carolina Rice Kitchen evolved from the plantations, and the people who were cooking in the plantations were mainly enslaved women. And they had that knowledge they brought with them. So going to like Senegal and going to the Gambia, going to Benin, which is people say is the home of gumbo. Benin claims gumbo like no other, and eating gumbo there and like seeing the similarities. Also just seeing the different stuff that was taken from us, like the fermentation stuff that they do that you didn't have time to do that anymore. You were enslaved. Or making of, like, we don't really eat fufu here.
What's fufu?
Fufu is a laborious thing. Fufu is the when they pound like yam or cassava and they make this, and it becomes a very stretchy thing. It's like the starch base for a lot of soups and stews. Here, you probably didn't really have time for that. But we also don't know, because a lot of the stuff that was documented of us is very few and far between. So it's just me kind of relearning and like just grasping things that were still with us and things that were taken.
Growing up, was there an acknowledgement in your house, teaching in your house about your Gullah Geechee heritage?
You just lived it, truthfully. It was never really nothing you talked about.
Did you speak?
You said certain words. I mean, like, you have to realize my parents' generation too were the generation that was told you don't speak that. It was not a term of endearment for their generation. It was a term of, you better learn how to speak proper English if you want to make it.
What does it sound like?
Well, I tell everybody the easiest thing to know is, because it's a saying that everybody across the country says now, kumbaya. Kumbaya is Gullah. It's an old Gullah spiritual. It's come by here. Gullah in its purest form is pretty much a dying language. So if I was to hear somebody speak pure Gullah all the way through to me, which I've only heard a few times in my life, it's almost foreign. You understand certain words, but it's almost foreign. But we still say a lot of the words in the dialect. Like, we will say stuff like, boy, man, look, yeah, what you got going on over here? That's, man, look, yeah, hey, what you doing? What you got going on right now? Certain words that we say in the everyday English vernacular. Tote, like, I'm about to go tote this. Tote, that's a Gullah word. Tote is a Gullah word. Let me see. We'll say, it's easy when we speaking amongst each other. Like, crack teeth is the way of saying we speaking, like cracking teeth. We're speaking with each other. Kuda is the word for turtle.
Okay, let's talk about the food. The most iconic dish from Charleston is, in my Yankee opinion, shrimp and grits.
Of course.
Is that a Gullah dish?
It is. I wouldn't say it's the most iconic. It's the most iconic outside of the Low Country. It's the one that we got most known for. I wouldn't say the most iconic. Even if you hate it, you still know how to cook it most of the time. Okra soup.
Okra soup?
Okra soup.
I gotta tell you, I'm relatively conversant with Southern cuisine, but not enough to know okra soup. So tell me about that.
So okra soup is a dish of okra, usually some smoked meat. It could be smoked beef. And we can get into the history of why it was beef before it was pork.
Well, tell me.
Because before the Civil War, pork was around, but there was a lot more mutton and beef being ate, particularly by those who had the resources to eat those things. Pork became so popular and so synonymous because it was a money thing, because pigs reproduce really, really fast. So even with South Carolina style barbecue, we're known for whole hog. But if you look at some of the old records, you see it was everything. Like, it was always usually a whole animal, goat, cow. When the newly freely enslaved got their freedom here in Beaufort County, South Carolina, where I live at now, which was in 1861 or 62, they cooked 4 whole ox. So I always say that pigs, became popular after the Civil War because most of the folks in the South became poor, and we were still agriculture place and raising hogs. Food wise, you can have food really fast because pigs reproduce fast, and you can also have hogs to sell. But going back to okra soup, yes, okra soup in the old records, you will see a shin of beef, and it's like okra, butter beans, or what we call city beans. In the Low Country, if you talk to a really older person, city beans, which is just a smaller style of a southern lima bean that came from the Seawee Indians here in the Low Country. It's a bean that they were stewards of, and it's very popular in Charleston. You go to anybody's house or any mom and pop restaurant in Charleston, particularly a Gullah Geechee owned restaurant, you're going to get a bowl of lima beans. So I guess that's another dish. So you got okra soup, but sometimes okra soup contains lima beans. Then you have a bowl of lima beans with some neck bone and pigtail and some white rice. That's another famous dish. But okra soup, yes, I'll go back really quick and I'll finish with okra soup. It is the dish of the Low Country. It's okra, smoked meat, usually seafood, usually small shrimp, butter beans. Some people shave corn into it. You hear some old folks call it gumbo, but we also have a style of gumbo, which is just straight up okra and tomatoes cooked down with some smoked meat or smoked fish.
It sounds to me like this is stereotypically the food of the poor, making great stuff out of ingredients that were widely available and inexpensive. Am I on the right track here?
Yes.
You'd throw in a little...
Well, stew pot cooking was always part of the culture. Like, I think that a lot of times, especially when we talk about like agrarian stuff and vegetables, it's always kind of more parallel towards poorer people in a sense, even though everybody kind of ate vegetables. Because when you talk about Charleston, there was always the vegetable man or vegetable lady who walked around the city. These vendors would sing about what they had. It could be about collard greens, and they would sell to some of the higher end people in the city.
Do you remember this from your childhood, or did it precede you?
Oh, those people were before my time. I would say Tony the Peanut Man. Rest in peace, Mr. Tony. He might have been one of the last of those vegetable vendors.
Tony the Peanut Man?
Tony the Peanut Man. We think he was the last of that generation of vendors.
Raw peanuts or boiled peanuts?
Roasted. Did he do? I mean, he might have did both. I can't remember. But these vendors had a certain song they would sing. They would sell mullet. I can't sing the songs. I don't know the lyrics, and you don't want me to sing, and I don't remember the lyrics of the song. But you can look up the history of Charleston vegetable vendors, and they always had a song. It would be shrimp. It could be they selling mullet. I mean, not just vegetables, but fish. I mean, you had people selling oysters. These were the Gullah Geechee people were the main vendors of fresh products in Charleston, even during enslavement days. That's why we have the old city market, what they call it. Sometimes people call it the old slave market, and they get it confused with a place where the enslaved was sold. Enslaved were never sold in the old city market. They were the ones who were selling goods because their enslaver would allow them to sell wares for, obviously they had to pay their enslaver the tax or whatever for them to do this. But that was the kind of unique dynamic in Charleston, in the city of Charleston. There was never the grand old plantations that you see. They were more like domestic plantations, domestic servitude. So in Charleston, crazy, you can look at some old paintings like 1850 something. You look at the city market and you see all these black vendors selling their wares to white patrons. It was an interesting dynamic, Charleston.
Tell me about other traditional Gullah Geechee dishes that I would encounter in the South.
A lot of rice dishes. Carolina Rice Kitchen is a cookbook that I think is very, very profound. We talk about different perlos, Hoppin' John, true Hoppin' John, even though Hoppin' John has spread and has become a very popular thing in America now. But Hoppin' John is a rice and peas, Sea Island red peas, rice, smoked meat. Hoppin' John's another dish. Obviously, our other rice dishes like crab rice, shrimp and okra. Shrimp and okra and rice together is one of the classic, is a favorite in our culture. And then you got straight up just okra rice, which people call Limpin' Susan, who was supposed to be the wife of Hoppin' John. Hoppin' John and Limpin' Susan, truthfully, are what you call like negative stereotypes of, you know how the Aunt Jemima look thing. So Hoppin' John is supposed to be in its truest form. That's what that represents. Hoppin' John was this old black man, raggy. He's all, torn, his clothes. He's old and feeble. He's hopping around begging for a little bit of that rice and peas. Hoppin' John.
Who started that? I mean, presumably.
That is one of the we don't know. That is one of the theories. Is my friend Robert Moss, who was a food writer here in Charleston. He wrote a whole thing on, I think, Serious Eats about that a couple years ago, about the history. But we all say Hoppin' John. A lot of us just don't know the history. And, and I'm one of those people like, okay, at this point, it's good to know the history, but let's not beat each other up because of that. I mean, you've been saying it for years. It is what it is. But it's good to know the backstory. But let's not lose our minds. Because we can't lose our minds these days over little stuff.
What about the other iconic dishes from Gullah Geechee culture?
There's a dish we love we call Soup Bunch. The story of Soup Bunch was, we have all these sea islands off the coastal side of Charleston, James Island, Johns Island, particularly James Island. The old Gullah ladies would go and pick up different stuff from different farmers. They had extra potatoes. They had extra rutabaga, turnips, hot pepper, cabbage, carrots, any other leafy green. They would pack it and put it in a bunch, and they would get in their boats and go into the city, to the market, and they would sell it as a soup bunch. And some of the older local grocery stores used to, one in particular, IGA, they still sell it in the wintertime. You can still buy it, and it says soup bunch. And the same thing, slow cooked, smoked meat, or no meat at all. You have it with some rice. You have that. I mentioned the lima beans earlier. I mentioned the rice dishes. I mentioned okra soup. Obviously, seafood. We love our stuffed crabs, devil crabs.
What do you stuff the crab with?
Just more crab. We'll take the crab back off, pick it, and make a mix. We call it devil crab. But, you see that in some other parts of the coastal South also. I think I said the okra soup, and obviously shrimp and grits. But I will say this, fish and grits is more iconic for us.
Excuse me? What?
Shrimp gravy over rice. We'd rather have shrimp and gravy with rice instead of grits. Shrimp and grits has become this thing because it's really popular in restaurants. But if you go to somebody's home, you're going to get shrimp and grits from people. But you go to a Gullah home, a lot of times they're going to say, I got some fried fish and a pot of grits on, and we're going to give you some smothered shrimp or shrimp gravy with some rice. But if you want it with grits, you can have it with grits. But we love shrimp gravy and rice. And I guess in Louisiana or in part of New Orleans, they call it etouffee. Very similar.
How do you make shrimp gravy? Is it heads and shells, or is it?
Yeah, we clean the shrimp, make a roux, and that's the influence from the European influence, the French influence, making a roux, the brown. But we take a roux very dark. Hence why a lot of French chefs, when they come in, they're like, whoa, y'all burning. Like they see Louisiana cooking, they're like, whoa, y'all burning the roux. But, we make a roux. Growing up for us, it was just water. Some onions, maybe if you use a little bit of fat back or bacon or whatever, put your flour in that grease until it gets nice and golden, peanut butter brown or even a little darker. Add some onions. And then in restaurants, you use chicken stock, shrimp stock. For my family, and growing up was just water, because we got to say another Gullah Geechee phrase, "E make your own gravy." E make your own gravy. So when you put the shrimp in there, the flavor from the shrimp is going to give you that depth of flavor you're looking for in your gravy anyway. So we love shrimp and gravy and rice, fish and grits, which, that's synonymous throughout the South.
There's a huge range of Southern cooking from Virginia down through the South over to Texas. What makes this cuisine different or unique from other Southern cooking?
I think I always compare us in New Orleans a lot. Two sister cities. Two very similar, slightly similar cultures. Foodways, they like jambalaya, we eat red rice. I always say the difference, and John Martin Taylor, who wrote a book who they used to call Hoppin' John, and he talked about it. He said, in Louisiana or Creole cooking, French and New Orleans cooking is more heavily influenced by the French. In the Low Country of South Carolina, the food is more heavily influenced by the African hand. Hence why you don't see a lot of the cream, as much cream and butter in our food. I say the biggest difference is a lot of it is just terroir. Like we love a dish, like we'll eat conch stew.
What is that?
Conch is a snail.
Oh, okay.
So we'll eat that. We'll stew it down. Some people stew it down with oxtails. Some people stew it down with stewed beef. So like we'll do like surf and turf stuff like that, like stew pots like that. Which you go to parts of West Africa, you see the same very similar thing. The okra dishes, the rice dishes for sure. I think the regionality in the terroir. We love oyster perlo. We love oyster rice here too. We love oyster stew, like stewed oysters over rice. But our oysters here in the Low Country is very different. You really can't get that same nuance of cooking the oysters and rice from a Gulf oyster than you can with a Low Country blade or custard oyster. They cook smaller, they eat better in a dish like that. So you see more oyster dishes with rice, stews here because that's how our oysters eat.
Well, I think Low Country oysters are much better than Gulf oysters.
I agree, and I love my folks in Louisiana and in the Gulf. I do love a good charbroiled oyster, though.
Charbroiled is fine in New Orleans. Obviously, the pinnacle in New Orleans is fried because the good chefs there know how to make a crust that leaves a little tiny atmosphere between it and the oyster. But let's be clear, the best oysters are up here in New Jersey and Delaware.
I'm very biased.
It's okay.
But I love me some good oysters. I would say the best oysters are your mood. If I'm in the mood for a good roast steamed oyster, I'm going to go Low Country. If I'm in a good mood for a nice raw, I'm going to go Northeast. I'll give y'all that.
Who taught you to cook?
Whew. I just watched. So I'm the middle child. I got two sisters. I would say I'm self-taught and kind of learned from like my mother maybe a little bit. I didn't grow up cooking, truthfully. Did not grow up cooking. But I was the only one who would ask my mama questions. And when I look back at my childhood, I think I loved cooking and I didn't know I loved it. And I loved culinary, but I didn't know I loved it. I would ask my mom questions. I love the smell of onions in that pan when I came in the house from school. And knowing that maybe she's about to make a gravy, she's about to maybe smother some chicken. And so, after a while, like I think maybe by the time I turned 16, I was like, I want to know how to make some smothered chicken. I want to impress my girlfriend. How do I fry some fish or some shrimp? I worked at a grocery store. I worked at Bojangles. I remember going to junior, senior high school with our home marketing teacher. He was big on trade school. And he was like, hey, I'm going to take y'all to tech. And I remember seeing all the different trades. I remember eating at the Culinary. And not at the time, I didn't really think about it. I remember telling myself, I could do that. But I wasn't thinking like, oh, I want to do this. I ended up going to college for 1 year and 1 year only. I had a little too much fun. Went to college in Charleston. Back when Charleston didn't shut down to 5 a.m., I probably shut down at 7. Came home and my parents were very pissed. Rightfully so. They were livid because I had a GPA that didn't even
exist. Yeah.
So I had to start working. So my parents were like, you want to work? You're going to go to trade school. You're going to go to school. You're going to go to technical college. I went to 2-year. And you're going to work. You're going to pay us. You're not living here for free anymore. You're going to have to pay a little bit to live here. And you're going to work and you're still going to go to school. So I went to Trident Technical College. Business for the first year. Started washing dishes at Hyman Seafood in Charleston because I had to get a job. And started just liking being in the kitchen. And then I think even the second semester or after the first year of school, I changed from business to culinary. And from there, it just took off. So
you worked at a variety of restaurants, I take it?
Yep. Worked in restaurants. At the same time, went to Trident Technical Culinary Institute. It's now called the Culinary Institute of Charleston. It's a pretty big culinary school now. But when I was there, Johnson & Wales was still in town. And when I was going to Culinary Institute, it was like mostly housewives and retirees. So it's really changed. But yeah, I worked in restaurants too while I was in school. Started off as a dishwasher, busboy, food runner, expediter. Worked my way from the bottom up. Fry cook. Just started working in some of the higher end kitchens in Charleston back in those days. We talking about 25 years ago. We talking about A2 Queen. We talking about Hank's Seafood.
This was before Husk?
Oh, before Husk. This is when Sean Brock was working at Peninsula Grill. Peninsula Grill and Hank's were sister restaurants. Sean was at Peninsula in like 98, 99, and he was in Tennessee. Sean came back when I moved back. Sean's part of that renaissance was like, whoa, Charleston food. And that's like, I came back 08. And he's a friend of mine too. And that's when I started to see, well, what's going on? Like everybody's talking about Charleston now.
Well, how do you feel about what's happened to the food scene in Charleston?
Oh, the food scene in Charleston now? It's nowhere where it was 10 years ago. How can I say it? It's very American now. That makes sense? It's not distinctive American anymore. It's just what you can get in Charleston, you can get in Manhattan, you can get in any other place now. There's very no distinction. There's no more. It's not chef driven anymore. It's PR driven. I came to Charleston 2008. So 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, probably up to 2015. You talk about Charleston, you talk about chefs, you talking about ingredient driven. Well, I'm not saying it's not like that anymore, but you talking about Sean Brock, Mike Lauder, Frank Lee, Jeremiah Bacon. He came from Per Se. He's from Charleston. I worked with Jeremiah. Who you talking about? I mean, I'm missing a lot of chefs. You talking about at that time where it was just like the renaissance of bringing all the old heritage ingredients back.
Well, are they bringing the old heritage recipes back, or is it old ingredients, new techniques?
Well, it was a little bit of both. Even with culture, Gullah food, there's stuff that my grandparents them ate or did, like salting down fish and salting fit and shrimp and hanging in the roof of the house. And in the wintertime, dried okra and dried shrimp was the okra soup that they ate. And my grandaunt talks to this day about that was the best gumbo that she had, was the one in the winter from the dried shrimp and the dried okra. So there was levels to the cooking too.
What are you doing with the cooking? How are you keeping Gullah cooking alive at the same time that you're, I think, probably evolving it somehow? What exactly are you doing?
Just cooking and talking now. I get asked a lot to come on and talk about the history of the food and just champion the old heritage ingredients. I felt like that kind of stopped. Truthfully, I'll give Sean a little bit of credit for that, man. I mean, I feel like that stopped. I mean, bringing back the old heirloom varieties of the Sea Islands, so I'm continue on with that. I mean, that's something that I loved since I was a kid, was farming. I mean, I did it with my grandfather. So, right now we're growing, I think maybe 2 acres. We got a lot of Carolina gold rice we're growing out in Georgia. So, and making sure that my community has access to these seeds, trying to figure out how to get the Carolina gold rice back into our community.
Wait. It left?
Well, it left, it came back, and it's too expensive. You don't have free labor no more. I mean, rice production, it ain't easy. But our people used to grow rice in the ditches in the yards back in the days, up to the late 70s. So getting us back to our agrarian roots, we as a country, I don't care racial background or not, supporting farming in a very respectable regenerative manner, stewarding our soil properly. So for me, it's more about continuing to talk about the history, also moving forward and progressing without forgetting about the roots and making sure that we keep these old heirloom varieties, bring these back, because you miss those, you miss a taste of your heritage.
Taste is something that has systematically been bred out of so much of the, especially fruits and vegetables that we eat, because now they're year-round and transportable. When's the last time you had a good tomato?
Whatever I grow in my backyard, or if I feel like buying it. Mm-hmm.
Well, I live in New Jersey. We're famous for our tomatoes, but only for about 4 weeks of summer. So
I was just about to say that. I'm actually waiting now. I got my tomato plants is coming up. We should have some of our Johns Island tomatoes coming around soon, but yeah.
Are they ugly? Nothing's uglier than a great Jersey tomato. They're misshapen. They look wrong because they haven't been bred to be perfectly round and transportable in plastic.
I believe most tomatoes that's in the grocery store, you can hit with a baseball bat and it won't burst. I'm true. I think that's true. You should try it.
No, I believe you. What have I not asked you about this subject that I don't know enough to ask that people ought to know?
Well, I think a lot of people always ask about what we're dealing with here, the loss of land, gentrification, and there's always these things online that says we're a dying culture. But we're not. We're not a dying culture. We're just not as insulated as we used to be, but we're still here. And then we are one of the original American cultures. And people in this country need to know that, like, this is a part of us. This is a part of America. It's not just an African-American thing. It's a part of America. It's one of the beautiful things about this country. And so you come to Charleston, come and look and search for us. So we're here throughout the Low Country, from Charleston to Savannah, Hilton Head Island. We're here, and support, and get to know the people. get to know the people.
I've had some great meals in Charleston, and it's interesting to me that it ranges from fried oysters at Bowen's Island to the ultimate interpretation of shrimp and grits at Husk. And I was going to say it goes from cheap to expensive, but Husk isn't expensive, so there you go. What a wonderful, wonderful city. And Chef, you are a delight to talk to and a font of information. So I want to thank you for taking this time to chat today. It's been both informative and delightful.
Thank you for having me. Oh yeah, and I forgot. I guess I got to plug in me. I'm a personal chef and caterer. So I don't have a stand up. I don't have a restaurant, but I do personal in-house. I do events. I do a lot of live-fi cooking. So you ever come in town, you're looking for a personal chef, I'm here for you. I'm social media. You can find me at Chef BJ Dennis on Instagram and on my Facebook page. And all my contact stuff is the email and telephone number.
Well, I'll make you a deal. Next time I'm in Charleston, if you'll go shopping with me for the ingredients, let's do a big dinner.
I'm here for it, man.
It's a deal. Chef, thank you again.
Thank you.
Chef BJ Dennis from Charleston, here on Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page, and I'll see you next time.